161. Sirius pronounced sentence. Dumbledore's voice faltered for a moment, as if he had not expected Sirius Black to still be unaware of why he had been brought to trial, or perhaps he was surprised that Black could still form clear thoughts and speak. After a few seconds of silence, the hand Dumbledore had placed on Sirius's shoulder tightened. "Yes," he said, "he is still alive. He transformed into a rat, disguised himself as a child's pet, and lived in hiding for 11 years, until he was arrested recently at Hogwarts," Dumbledore continued. Sirius stared at the floor, blank and drifting in thought. Dumbledore went on to describe the crimes Peter Pettigrew had confessed to. It had been Pettigrew who betrayed them, Pettigrew who had allowed the Potters to be murdered, and Pettigrew who, when faced with capture by Sirius, used a spell that killed a dozen Muggles. Wizards who had not heard the earlier trial murmured in astonishment. The courtroom buzzed despite the chair's attempts to restore order. "Such a despicable scum should be given a kiss by a Dementor," Moody growled, disgust plain on his face. "The Ministry has sentenced him to life imprisonment." Lupin looked uneasy but added, "Perhaps it's better to let the creature live and endure a long torture." "Was Pettigrew tried yesterday?" someone named Veedy asked. "A secret trial, few listeners." Lupin swallowed his emotion. "Peter's trial was supposed to be after Sirius's, but Dumbledore had it brought forward." Moody nodded. "Only by confirming Pettigrew's crimes can Sirius Black be declared innocent." He fixed a hard stare on Sirius, searching that gaunt face for any hidden expression. "If you ask me, Fudge lacks courage. If it were Millicent Bagnold, Pettigrew wouldn't be allowed to enjoy the rest of his life." "Peter Pettigrew is an animagus," Veedy asked. "Will he turn into a rat and escape from Azkaban?" Moody shook his head. "I don't like those creatures any more than you do, but I'll say this. Dementors are the best wardens in the world. No one escapes them, even if, as some say, they don't have eyes. Since they know he's an animagus, the Ministry has measures for animagi," Lupin added. While they spoke in low tones, Dumbledore presented the limited evidence, chiefly Peter Pettigrew's testimony. Then they produced Sirius Black's wand, confiscated years earlier. The Ministry had dug it out of a dusty evidence room and cast Prior Incantato on it, forcing each spell to replay. The examination took more than 10 minutes. The deadly spell that had killed the Muggles did not appear. The Wizengamot members exchanged knowing looks. Most had already understood the facts. The speech was as much for the reporters and the uninformed as for the court. After the wand had been examined, the case against Black looked hard to deny. Fudge then offered his theory. If they had misjudged Sirius Black, releasing him could give Voldemort an important instrument for return, endangering the whole wizarding world. For Fudge, stability mattered above guilt or innocence. He wanted the Ministry to remain a calm lake so he could keep his position, take safe political credit now and then, and fill his vault. Change made him uneasy. Peter Pettigrew had been hidden for over a decade. He had done nothing in that time, so living was no different from being dead. Sirius, on the other hand, was an unknown risk, a ticking time bomb. And if Sirius had not betrayed them, he might be on Dumbledore's side, and that was an allegiance Fudge could not bear. His worries sounded reasonable to some, and a few nodded. Amelia Bones looked down at the silent Sirius. "Sirius Black, do you have anything to say?" He stayed motionless for a long beat. Fudge muttered, "I think he might not even understand you, Amelia." Then, in a dry voice, Sirius slowly raised his head. "I am guilty," he said. "They're as good as killed by me. It was I who persuaded James and Lily, at the last moment, to change their secret keeper to Peter. Instead of me, I made a terrible mistake. It was I who killed them. It's my fault. I am guilty." "No, that's not true," Harry blurted before he could stop himself. Every head in the courtroom snapped to him. Fudge's eyes widened in shock. "No shouting," he barked. People were already whispering, identifying the boy. Harry knew they were looking at him and that he might be asked to leave at any moment, but he forced himself to shout louder, every word burning through him. "You are not guilty. Even if my parents were here, they wouldn't think you guilty. It was Lord Voldemort who killed them, not you. Pettigrew's betrayal is not your fault." The name Lord Voldemort sent another ripple through the room. Men and women stood, some glaring, some incredulous. "Did you hear that?" He said the name. Of course, he is Harry Potter. Sirius suddenly lifted his head, straining to see the speaker. His hollow eyes filled with moisture and shone with a sudden, clear light that seemed to banish the decay from his face. "James?" he whispered, voice trembling. Amelia Bones had to pound her gavel several times before she could force the room back to order. "Please be quiet, Mr. Potter," she warned. "If you do not, I will have no choice but to ask you to leave." Harry sank back into his seat, cheeks burning, staring at his toes and barely believing his own outburst. Lupin patted his shoulder reassuringly. Sirius's eyes were wet as he met Harry's gaze across the rows. "Then, those who find the charge valid, please raise your hand," Amelia announced. One by one, a few hands went up. "Those who find the charge not valid, please raise your hand." Many more arms shot up. People nodded and even smiled at Harry as they did. More than half of the courtroom had raised their hands. "Charge not valid," Amelia cried, slamming her gavel. "Sirius Black, acquitted," she declared. "Not guilty, acquitted." The woman's voice declaring the verdict rang like a bell in Sirius Black's ears, but he sat like a man stunned, eyes dull and unfocused. He didn't notice Fudge's angry snort as the minister shoved back his chair and strode away. He didn't see other wizards hurrying after him. He didn't even feel Dumbledore's hand lift from his shoulder. People drifted out along the aisles, some speaking in low voices, some looking at him with pity or disgust, but Sirius hardly seemed aware of them. He stared at the floor as if it had nothing to show him. Someone took his hand, hauled him to his feet, and held him tightly. Remus. The name flared in Sirius's mind, his friend, whom he had not seen in far too long. He tried to speak, but his throat felt clogged, so instead he hugged Lupin back, arms shaking. The warmth of another human body was like sunlight, pulling him out of the darkness. They stayed like that a long time before finally letting go. "Remus," Sirius's mouth formed a weak, lopsided smile. "I never thought I'd see you, looking so old." "I'm sorry, Sirius." Remus's voice was low. "For 11 years I didn't believe you. I should have known you were the least likely of all our lot to betray James." "No," Sirius's face crumpled at the memory. "I was the one who suggested the plan. I thought it was perfect. If it hadn't been for me—" He shook his head, cutting himself off. He didn't want to hear the easy comforts. Beside Lupin stood a boy with messy black hair and bright green eyes, fidgeting and hopeful. He looked uncannily like James when he was young, and Sirius went momentarily dazed, as if seeing his dead friend again. He opened and shut his mouth a few times before finding his voice. "Harry? Yes, it's me." Harry sounded tentative. He was meeting Sirius for the first time, yet Lupin's stories had made the man feel familiar. Years of school pranks and dormitory nights, fighting Slytherin, Lupin's secret in the second year, the friends learning to become animagi to accompany him in his transformations, James pursuing Lily until finally winning her, Sirius leaving the pureblood Blacks at 16 and being taken in by the Potters, Sirius as best man at the wedding, all of them joining the Order of the Phoenix. Lupin had left out darker details, Peter Pettigrew's treachery, but the picture Harry had been given was bright with courage and loyalty. He felt, despite having never met Sirius before, as if he had always known him. Sirius looked him up and down, incredulous. "Last time I saw you, you were this small." He made a tiny circle with his fingers, then enlarged it as if it weren't quite right. Harry smiled shyly. "I know." Sirius hesitated, then blurted, "I don't know if anyone's told you, Harry, I'm your godfather." "Yes, I know." Harry nodded, then stepped forward and hugged him. Sirius bent and returned the embrace, arms trembling. "Your parents named me your guardian if anything happened to them," he said hoarsely. "I know I don't have the right to ask you to leave the people who raised you, but if you'd ever want, if you're willing, I'd like to take care of you." Lupin slipped an arm around Sirius's shoulder and smiled gently. "Sirius, you've just been acquitted. Don't rush things. Go home, wash up, change your clothes, eat something proper, get some rest." Sirius's smile, fragile as it was, flickered. All right. He was about to say more to Harry when Lupin added, "Oh, there's someone I should introduce. He's not known to you, but he's the one who did most to get your case reopened." Sirius's head snapped up. "Who?" "Veed Grey," Lupin said with a little pride. "He's Harry's classmate, and my employer and pupil." He looked pleased to say it. "He's only 12, but he's the sharpest young wizard I've ever met." "12? Employer?" Sirius repeated, as if he'd misheard. Before Lupin could answer, though, his eyes went to the seat Vady had been occupying. It was empty. "He's gone," Moody said. He had not yet left. Dumbledore called him away. "He told me to tell you not to wait for him." The crowds moved to the stair and hurried toward the lifts. The underground corridors smelled of dust and felt oppressively dark. No one lingered there if they could help it. Vede, however, found himself pausing and looking toward a further passage. It was pitch black, without doors, windows, or even torches. At the end was a black door, as if it were calling to anyone curious enough to come closer. "That's the Department of Mysteries," Dumbledore said beside him. "The Ministry's most secret rooms. They contain things difficult to describe, much less control." "Not even you know what's in there?" Vede asked. "I must admit, that place makes me feel childish and ignorant." Dumbledore laughed softly. "Many people assume I master more magic than others, but on the path of magic I'm still only an apprentice." "What kind of magic is inside?" Vade pressed. "Many kinds," Dumbledore replied. "About time, about death, about prophecy. Learned wizards work there day and night, studying the most obscure and dangerous branches of magic. They are called silence keepers. They take vows never to reveal their work." "Silence keepers," Vede repeated, thinking it over. Then he asked the question that mattered. "Professor, why did you need me?" "I wanted to thank you, Vede." Dumbledore's voice was quiet. "I was mistaken in my judgment about Sirius." He went on. "I accepted, without sufficient investigation, that Sirius was the Potter's secret keeper. After he was imprisoned, I did not visit him. Had I done so, even once, I might have realized he wasn't the betrayer." Vede did not reproach him. He considered a moment and said, "When you first believed he'd betrayed them, you must have been furious and terribly disappointed." "Indeed," Dumbledore sighed. "I have seen so many gifted young people fall into darkness. I supposed Sirius had too." "Mr. Black cannot really be blamed for placing the plan you all devised," Vade said. "It fooled everyone. If Peter Pettigrew hadn't betrayed them, it would have been a fine strategy." "Yes." Dumbledore's sigh deepened. "Who could have imagined a close friend could become unrecognizable? It makes you wonder whether you ever truly knew him." Vede glanced at Dumbledore's half-profile, the face half-swallowed by torchlight. He couldn't tell whom the headmaster was thinking of. 163. Old friends. Hall, a woman's voice in the lift announced coldly, and the gilded doors slid open. Dumbledore and Vede stepped out together. They had not walked far before they came upon a large fountain in the center of the hall. Its centerpiece a cluster of statues cast in pure gold. A handsome, noble wizard held his wand aloft. A beautiful witch gazed at him adoringly. Around them, centaurs, goblins, and house elves looked up with reverent admiration. At the base of the fountain lay a scatter of gleaming coins, and a small plaque read, "All proceeds from the Fountain of Magical Brethren go to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries." They stopped at the fountain at the same time and looked up at the figures. "Exquisite work, isn't it?" Dumbledore said with a smile, and tossed a handful of coins into the water. "But I suspect only wizards and house elves truly appreciate it. Centaurs and goblins might not find it to their taste." "Goblins will like the gold," Vede replied. Dumbledore laughed softly. "True. Do you think the money really goes to patients?" Vede asked. "Muggle wishing wells are basically a way of hoarding coins." "You can be sure on that point. Magic makes wizards more trustworthy," Dumbledore said. Vede added his own coins. The bright galleons stuck out against a pile of silver sickles and bronze nuts. A spray of water gushed from the ear of the house elf statue and spattered the surface near Vede, the spray seeming tinged with gold. After a pause, Dumbledore sighed. "Wizards, centaurs, goblins, house elves, we are equal in mind and in magic, just as wizards, squibs, and muggles are all human. All the races make up our world. Each is part of society," Vede said. "But wizard prejudice and arrogance make the others suffer, and in the end, the wizards suffer as well." "And within wizards, it's no different," Dumbledore replied. "Purebloods despise half-bloods and muggle-borns. Nobles look down on commoners, the rich on the poor, the clever on the foolish. Even without racial division, the chain of scorn is everywhere." "Some scorn gives people motive to strive," Dumbledore said, "but others condemn people merely for the accident of their birth." Vede said nothing. Dumbledore might have been speaking of house elves, or perhaps of squibs or muggles. He was discussing things children rarely thought about, but Veed had no wish to unravel his own feelings and lay them bare. After a moment, Dumbledore relaxed and smiled. "Let us go." "Professor, where are we going?" Veed asked, falling into step. "You don't know the destination, and yet you follow me?" Dumbledore teased. "You are Dumbledore," Veed said simply. The smile this time seemed genuinely warm. The blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles narrowed, and the crow's feet at their corners smoothed. "I want to introduce you to someone," he said, "an old friend I have not seen for a long time." Outside the ministry, Dumbledore asked, "Have you ever tried apparition, Veed?" "No, Professor," Veed answered. "Then I'll show you. You must hold my arm tightly." Dumbledore offered his arm. "It's not pleasant at first, but I will look after you." Veed took his arm. Dumbledore's height made Veed feel very small, like a child again. "Excellent. Ready?" A sudden, intense pressure closed in from every direction, as if the air itself compressed him like something squeezed through a tube. With a sharp pop, Veed felt himself released, his limbs uncrumpled as if they had been allowed to grow back. He blinked and looked up to find Dumbledore waiting patiently. "Are you all right?" Dumbledore asked. "The sensation takes some getting used to." "I'm fine," Veed said, drawing a breath. "I heard that in the war, underage children had to learn apparition." "That was so," Dumbledore nodded. They stood in an unfamiliar valley. A narrow, dark path wound into dense woods. On a nearby hill stood an ornate but dilapidated house. An overgrown graveyard lay close by. Nothing about the place suggested recent habitation. Veed felt a strange unease, but kept silent and followed Dumbledore along the path. Dumbledore did not make him guess. He flicked his wand, and a mist rolled forward. Two faint shapes appeared ahead, vague, pale figures of a man and a woman. The man, riding a horse, looked well-dressed and handsome. The woman, bent and shabbily clothed, seemed frail. They were an odd pair, but the man lifted the woman onto the horse, and they rode away down the country lane. Many years ago, a young couple lived here. Tom Riddle, the handsome son of a Muggle family, eloped with Merope Gaunt, who came from a wizarding line, Dumbledore said. It was a scandal at the time. To most people, Riddle was the local squire, and the Gaunts were eccentric vagrants. They were completely mismatched. So when, a few months later, Tom Riddle returned to the village alone, the villagers were not surprised. The mist shifted. The man stumbled back along the path without the woman. Dumbledore offered his arm. "Come, let me show you what became of Merope." Veed gripped him again. With a popping crack, they were in a narrow London alley. Dumbledore cast a disillusionment charm, and they stepped out into a street where Muggles passed unaware. The mist rolled past them and revealed a blurry, heavily pregnant woman making her way with difficulty. White snowflakes fell onto her shoulders. Dumbledore said softly, "Merope, abandoned by her husband, became pregnant and lived in utter poverty. On a snowy night, she gave birth in the orphanage ahead." The woman sagged and collapsed. People in a nearby yard heard the commotion, rushed through a large iron gate, and helped her inside. The scene flickered. A baby was born. A matron in an apron held him up for the mother to see. The mother tried to speak, then fell silent. Her arm dropped limp. After giving birth, Merope died. Before she passed, she named the child after his father, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Veed stared at the yard. The old orphanage was deserted now, the grounds choked with weeds, the whole place smelling of age and neglect. A government notice about imminent demolition still hung on the outer wall. "I think you can guess," Dumbledore said softly, waving his wand, "that Merope used a love potion to ensnare the elder Tom Riddle. When she stopped, he left her and their child without a second thought." At his words, an image formed in the air. In the mist, the infant grew quickly into a small, solitary boy. Other children kept their distance. The boy talked to the snakes in the corner. He would send a little conjured rabbit floating up to hang from a rafter. Sometimes he dashed into a room, rifled through beds and wardrobes, then slipped things into his pockets. Dumbledore's voice continued, "I don't know what he might have become in a loving home, but an orphanage hardly provides one. Little Tom Riddle picked up bad habits fast, stealing, bullying. He had innate powers that let him hurt children older and stronger than himself," Dumbledore added. Once, when the boy's misdeeds seemed discovered, a thin, fierce-looking one seized his arm and shoved him into a room, locking the door. She moved with both anger and cautious watchfulness. The boy sat on the bed, as if reading. The mist shifted and another figure entered, a tall, long-bearded young man. Though the image was hazy, Vedi recognized him at once. "That's me," Dumbledore said. "That child was a wizard. His name was on Hogwarts' register from birth. When he turned 11, I came to collect him for school." The young Dumbledore did not speak long. Abruptly, he raised his wand and sparked the wardrobe into ghostly flame, and the boy leapt up. The flames vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Tom Riddle took a cardboard box from the wardrobe and spilled out the things he had stolen. After a few curt words, the younger Dumbledore handed the boy a small bag of money, and their meeting was over. "Come," Dumbledore said, extending his arm. "The next part is at Hogwarts." They apparated to the school, but kept their disillusionment charms on. Veed's charm blurred her like a chameleon. A very attentive observer might notice something off. Dumbledore's charm, however, was like an invisibility cloak, flawless and utterly undetectable. Students streamed past in the corridors without seeing the two extra figures. In the mist, the boy reappeared, now in a Hogwarts uniform and carrying textbooks. People drifted around him, their numbers growing as he aged. Professors smiled at him, charmed by his talent. Dumbledore alone watched him with a steady, searching gaze. Riddle was extraordinarily gifted, brilliant, handsome, and an orphan, Dumbledore said. He drew the sympathy and attention of the faculty, and most liked him. He soon gathered a circle of devoted followers, subordinates, really. They were an odd, tightly knit group from various houses. Over the years, several serious incidents occurred at Hogwarts, though nothing could be conclusively pinned on them. The worst of those incidents ended in the death of a girl. The mist shifted to a pale, bespectacled body lying rigid on the floor, eyes open and unseeing. The scene placed them near the second-floor lavatory. Muffled sobs came from within. "Myrtle," Dumbledore said. "She was a Ravenclaw who died in that bathroom. She had been mocked and bullied by classmates. She died there, crying. We never established exactly what killed her. I suspect Riddle played some part." After Myrtle's death, Hogwarts briefly teetered on the brink of scandal and possible closure. Riddle seized the moment and pointed the blame at another pupil, accusing him of keeping a deadly pet. The vision changed. Tom Riddle wrestled with a large, rough boy as a massive, many-eyed spider skittered down the corridor and escaped. Riddle shouted. People rushed in. "Is that Hagrid?" Veed asked. "Yes," Dumbledore confirmed. Hagrid was expelled at that time, his wand broken, and forbidden from performing magic by the Ministry. But I believed in his innocence and persuaded Headmaster Dippet to let him stay on as gamekeeper. Hagrid had lost his father and had nowhere else to go. Time moved on in the mist. Tom Riddle grew into a tall, handsome young man. He became head boy, won prizes, then graduated. The scenes that followed felt years apart. The smiling faces of schoolmates gave way to darker images. Riddle's features had grown pale and hard. Behind him trailed followers in black robes with hoods and masks like things out of nightmares. They burst into homes, murdered the occupants, forced others to kneel and suffer. The mist showed no sound, but the cruelty was plain. Soon the corridor seemed piled with corpses, a sea of blood. Lifeless bodies lay in all sorts of broken postures, eyes blankly fixed on the ceiling. After graduation, Riddle asked to stay at Hogwarts but was refused, Dumbledore said. He turned down an invitation from the Ministry, spent some time working at Borgin and Burke's in Knockturn Alley, and then vanished for many years. When he returned, he called himself Lord Voldemort. His followers were the Death Eaters. He did not regard them as friends or family, only servants. He demanded that they kneel and kiss his robes or even the back of his foot as a mark of honor. They committed terrible acts. Wizards and muggles died, panic spread, and Voldemort reached the height of his power, until he was brought down by an infant. In the last image, the great dark wizard fell backward and dissolved into mist. Nearby, a baby clenched tiny fists and wailed. The scene folded in on itself, like a cycle beginning again. 165 Leaf. The bell for the end of class rang, and the mist cleared. Veed looked up at Dumbledore, and Dumbledore was looking at him. Behind his half-moon spectacles, Dumbledore's eyes were the color of a deep blue sea. "You let me see Voldemort's life," Veed said cautiously. "What was your purpose?" Dumbledore stretched out his hand. A single leaf, blown in from the window, drifted into his palm. "Look at this leaf, child. What does it make you think of?" He answered his own question. Some would say green, some would say nature, some would say environment, some would say it's pleasing to the eye, some would think it's food for insects, some would think of the passage of time and the cycle of life, and some would say a leaf is just a leaf. After a pause, he repeated, "A leaf is just a leaf, Vede. What you associate with it should depend on yourself." He placed the leaf in Vede's hand with a smile. "It's lunchtime. Go and eat. There's treacle tart today. It'd be a shame to miss it." Dumbledore left, and Vede stared at the leaf in his palm for a long time. In the Pensieve, Dumbledore had shown him Voldemort's life path. Not a lecture, not a long sermon, just a clear presentation of moments and choices, then leaving the questions for Vede to answer. Did Dumbledore know about their club activities? Had he seen something from Vede's push to reopen Sirius's case? Vede thought it over, then slipped the leaf into his book as a makeshift bookmark. Whatever Dumbledore meant to convey, Vede told himself he would not change his way of doing things because of it. Early the next morning, owls bearing mail swooped into Hogwarts, blotting the sky and dropping heavy bundles of newspapers onto the Great Hall tables. Vede opened the Daily Prophet. The first thing he saw was a photograph of Harry and Sirius embracing, Lupin smiling in the corner so that only half his face showed. A smaller inset picture showed Peter Pettigrew in a prison uniform. The headline read, "Sirius Black acquitted, Peter Pettigrew given life sentence." Padma flipped through the Prophet and called loudly to Michael. A cheer went up at the Gryffindor table. Fred and George Weasley had on ridiculous hats and were jumping on their stools. They had helped in Pettigrew's capture and had been following the case closely. The outcome made them as thrilled as if they'd been freed themselves. Not everyone was pleased. Ron and Percy both wore dark faces, seemingly embarrassed by the thought that Peter had once been their pet. One of Percy's dorm mates was still shouting, "We used to live in the same dormitory as that creepy thing. Percy, I'll never have a rat as a pet in my life." Laughter broke out around him. Nearby, Vade heard Cho Chang whisper to a friend, "I don't mind hamsters, but could you not keep them in the dormitory?" Marietta looked uncomfortable. "Don't mention it. I'll send it back and have my mum keep it in the garden for me." "By owl?" Cho asked. "No, with the cage," Marietta said. Because the school's owls were used for sending letters, many girls had kept small, fluffy pets and sometimes took them outside on good days. After the Pettigrew affair, though, the number of rodent pets at Hogwarts dropped by more than half. Even the owners who didn't want to part with them stopped keeping them in dormitories. 2 empty dorm rooms in Ravenclaw Tower were turned into makeshift kennels for pets. A few cats weren't even allowed in dorms anymore and lived in common rooms. Ravenclaw fared a little better. Fewer people, fewer pets. Gryffindor, as usual, argued the most about such things. "Hey, Draco." Someone shrieked from the Slytherin table. "I heard Sirius Black's your uncle. He's been acquitted. You must be delighted." Draco Malfoy's face went sour. "Sirius Black is the last heir of the House of Black, but he's a blood traitor who was disowned," another Slytherin, Morton, said with malicious relish. Low, cruel laughter rippled down the table. "Shut up, you lot," Marcus Flint snapped, rising to defend Draco for the sake of the family brooms. "What has a disowned traitor got to do with the Malfoys? Draco hasn't even met him." Vede glanced across the room. Draco's back was to them, so his expression was hard to read, but Vede could see his hand under the table, clenching his wand so tightly the tip trembled. "Vede!" Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't bother with study this morning. Come to the game field." "Okay." Vede put down his fork and followed him out of the Great Hall. The grass was damp but not muddy. Most of the plants had gone yellow, and the ground was carpeted with fallen leaves that made the air smell faintly of autumn. About a dozen students were already gathered on the field, waiting for the participants from the previous round to finish. When they saw Vede, several of them went pale. "Which one do you want to play?" Professor Flitwick asked cheerfully, wand in hand. "Duels or Battle Royale?" A timid girl raised her hand. "If it's Battle Royale, is it the Vede version or the Professor version?" Flitwick chuckled and glanced at Vede. "Of course the Professor's version. Vede is a player today as well." A collective sigh of relief ran through the group. Battle Royale? We choose Battle Royale. Veed's face darkened. Michael laughed. All right, Flitwick said, pressing a small timer into motion. 5 minutes to prepare. The students scattered across the field. Those who had already agreed to team up hurried together, wands drawn, hauling benches and discarded props to build barricades. The arena filled with imaginative fortifications, overturned crates, entwined broomsticks, hastily enchanted cobwebs. The field grew more and more complicated as every corner was turned into cover. The students' inventiveness turned the game into a living maze. Come on, Michael said, tugging Veed toward a promising patch of cover. We need to find a place to hide first. You'll see why Professor Flitwick's Battle Royale is so popular. Michael ran until he found an ideal spot. It looked like a little fortress cobbled together by previous students, worn wardrobes and rickety tables stacked to form walls, leaving only a narrow gap to peer through. This will do, Michael said. Quick, help me block the big openings. Veed waved his wand. A nearby stool lifted into place, and the small gaps glued themselves shut as scattered detritus shifted to fill them, leaving only 3 or 4 tiny peepholes. The rules of this battle royale are simple, Michael said. First, don't get hit. Second, don't get discovered. Third, capture the queen. Queen? Veed asked. Shh, quiet, they're coming. Michael hushed him and motioned toward a peephole. A swarm of tiny humanoid creatures fluttered down the alley, wings beating, each clutching a miniature wand. Veed's eyes widened. Fairies? Michael smiled. A green fairy heard a sound and darted to a gap to look through. Hidden on either side, Michael and Veed were unseen. The fairy raised its little wand and, with a couple of soft puffs, shot 2 blobs of red berry juice that splattered against the opposite table, leaving a sweet-smelling stain. Satisfied no one was there, it turned and flew off. Ah, someone's been spotted, came a gasp nearby. A boy and a girl shoved aside the makeshift barriers, grabbed hands, and ran. Dozens of fairies surged after them, shooting sticky berry blobs as they went poof, 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 leaving a trail of fragrance. Veed looked at Michael. I could take them all out with one hand. I could too, Michael admitted, but we can't. We're not allowed to use powerful magic on them. Not even when catching the queen? The only magic permitted on fairies is this. Michael flicked his wand and murmured a charm. A small soap bubble bloomed at the tip, just big enough to enclose a single fairy. It's simple. I'll show you, he said. No need, Veed said, already raising his wand. A bubble 10 times larger swelled into being around his hand. A fairy peered through a gap and, seeing the expanding globe, shrieked and darted away. The 2 of them followed its flight with their eyes. Then Michael scolded, Veed, no cheating. I didn't cheat. It's the same spell as yours. Using the spell beyond the limit of your power is cheating. Fine. Veed sighed and popped the oversized bubble. They settled into a rhythm, popping up, trapping lone fairies in modest bubbles, retreating and sealing peepholes whenever large groups came by. Fairies were simple creatures. If they couldn't see anyone, they assumed no one was there. Veed often nabbed them as they turned to leave. As the fairy numbers thinned, more students slipped out of hiding and converged. The queen wore a tiny golden dress and vast, iridescent wings. She always flew in the center of her attendants. With the little soldiers rounded up, her position became exposed. As everyone closed in, a Gryffindor girl launched herself from a high ledge and, before the fairies could react, a perfectly formed soap bubble slid over the Golden Queen. I win, she cried, holding up her wand. Her friends whooped. The remaining fairies buzzed angrily and tried to tug at her hair, but she ignored them. What's so great about catching the queen? Let's see who can catch the most, a Slytherin boy said, producing a bag full of fairies trapped in bubbles. We have 35. We've got 38. 47. One by one, they displayed their hauls. Michael cleared his throat loudly. When the crowd looked his way, he gave a theatrical wave, and a cascade of fairy bubbles spilled from his wand. I didn't count, he said, feigning modesty, but I'd say over 200. Silence fell for a beat, then voices rose. Are we going to eat? I'm starving. Library after dinner? Yeah, homework. The students dispersed. As they walked away, Veed heard someone mutter, no wonder the game ended so quickly. Another voice replied, most of them must have been caught by Veed. Jealousy, came a scoffing retort. Michael, Not getting the adulation he fancied, grumbled, "Oh, well, I guess it's over." Professor Flitwick appeared as if on cue. With a small sweep of his wand, every bubble dissolved and the fairies flew free, buzzing around him and chattering in outraged tones. All right," he soothed, producing a large jar and opening it to reveal nectar. The fairies' complaints evaporated, and they obediently landed on the rim. "How was it, Vidi?" Professor Flitwick asked. "Was the battle royale fun?" "Fun," Vidi said, "but it could use more excitement. I have an idea." Michael leaned forward as a few fairies hopped onto their shoulders, wings tickling. Professor Flitwick listened and nodded. Not bad, not bad. That would be much more entertaining, but it's a lot of work. I'd have to get the other professors involved and Professor McGonagall's permission." "Don't worry, McGonagall will sign off," Michael said. "But can we make a scoreboard? It sounds complicated." "Not too hard," Vidi said. "I'll ask Fred and George to help. They can build it in an afternoon." "Padma can draw the blueprints," Michael continued. "Theo and I can design the scoring and monster ratings so it's fair. The older students can help with construction," Vide added. "Cedric can rally people. He's persuasive," Michael said. "Finished in a day?" "No problem." Michael finished with an emphatic thumbs up. Next update delayed, possibly until evening. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from http://lab.com/novel/687/Hogwarts-Voldemort's Don't Stop Me From Studying/chapter 167 failed with the following error. Network error while loading http://lab.com/get. Failed to fetch. "I don't think Ultimate Challenge is a good name," Vidi said to Michael. "An ultimate challenge shouldn't have an ultimate." "What if your final boss is defeated?" Michael replied. "Then tell the challenger it's just a black iron boss, and after black iron there are bronze, silver, gold, platinum, emerald, diamond, master, grandmaster, king. Then 1-star king, 2-star king, 3-star king, and after 9-star king, there's even a god-level checkpoint. Isn't that great? Spare us." Michael rolled his eyes. "If it goes on like that, we'll never finish this challenge game in a lifetime." "Why finish it?" Vide shot back. "A game with an ending will become dust in people's memories. Only something endless makes people keep coming back." "I think this memory will never grow stale," Michael said. "Tell me honestly," Michael went on, "did you come up with this whole setup because everyone disliked the Vidi version of the escape game?" "How could that be?" Vide protested, a hint of guilt in his voice. "I thought about it for a long time, how to make the game more interesting and useful for everyone. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision." "Stop quibbling. Your hesitation says it all," Michael retorted. Vide fell silent. The professors nearby watched the students' progress in the arena and smiled indulgently at the two bickering. Even Professor Snape said nothing. Over the day and a half that followed, Vide truly realized how much the school staff could accomplish together. His memory went back to noon the previous day. Padma, with a few other girls, had produced the new layout in a single afternoon. It was a huge space divided into 7 concentric areas, each containing intricate mazes. From the outermost ring to the center, the areas became progressively smaller until they converged at a single point. Players chose one of 7 entrances, passed through 7 levels, and then faced the final boss. If they failed or gave up, they had to start over from the beginning. Michael and the SSC crew borrowed a complete set of protecting magical creatures from the library and selected 37 magical creatures suitable for students. Vide, meanwhile, used a friend account to contact Professor Mori and consulted Mr. Scamander. Together they devised a new alchemical device, commonly called the real-time scorer. Vide had carved an inscription on it, "Hero List." Professor Flitwick pulled in the whole staff to help, from Dumbledore to Filch, from the nearly retired Professor Kettleburn to the Thestrals that pulled the school carriages. Everyone pitched in. Only Filch grumbled, worried that mischievous students would exploit the chaos. First, several herbology professors and advanced students acted. Overnight, they made countless shrubs grow out of nowhere, completely surrounding the old game area and forming the basic framework. The shrubs weren't as deadly as Devil's Snare, but their thorns were excruciating. The vegetation was so dense that only tiny insects could squeeze through some gaps. Then Professor Flitwick and the advanced charm students shaped the terrain between the shrubs, alleyways, swamps, forests, flower fields, small hills, and seemingly flat plains concealing traps. Flitwick enchanted keys and paper airplanes to fly through the area. Students had to catch them to get clues. He even invited Lockhart to join. Lockhart waved his wand grandly, promising a singular spectacle, but his spell backfired and launched him into a trap Flitwick had just set. Students had to carry him off to the infirmary. Dumbledore, McGonagall, and skilled transfiguration students made the maze fantastical. Branches became archways, withered leaves turned into tatters of cloth, and a rotten apple transformed into a carriage that exuded a putrid smell. Dumbledore set up little mechanisms so that those who triggered certain traps would temporarily turn into goats or wild boars. He clearly anticipated the chaos with some glee. Snape and Madame Pomfrey contributed potions, hiding vials throughout the maze. Some repelled magical creatures, some caused disorientation, some healed, an array of effects. Snape, however, refused to hand out useful potions freely to students who didn't appreciate them. He placed invertible potions beside the helpful ones, brews that induced vomiting or endless hiccups, potions that caused fainting or irritability. He also left numerous logic and potion quiz questions. Students who answered wrongly would suffer the bitter consequences of not paying attention in class. Kettleburn and Hagrid released the creatures into the designated areas based on Michael's list. Both had hoped Dragon Norberta would be the ultimate boss, but the rest of the staff vetoed that idea. In the end, Veed's suggestion won out. The final boss was a ball python under an engorgement charm. It was a non-venomous, common snake that, magnified by magic, could resist many spells, move with unexpected agility, and grow as large as a prehistoric beast. Its scales gleamed with a metallic sheen. A mere glimpse of its massive coils could terrify timid students. There were also harmless animals and grotesquely enlarged but harmless insects. Veed mischievously assigned higher scores to the most terrifying-looking creatures, so challengers seeking points would have to face them. Fairies are cute, right? Can fairies give you points? Veed thought. An enlarged earthworm burrowed into the ground and created underground passages. Flitwick hid entrances, but left riddles full of clues. The Thestrals patrolled the maze, guiding students who were lost and occasionally creating a spine-tingling atmosphere. Dumbledore also arranged for a group of house elves to act as lifeguards. They could apparate freely within Hogwarts. Their large ears picked up any movement in the maze, and their innate magic let them sense urgent needs, making them perfect rescuers. This was the first time house elves appeared openly before the students. When they first showed up, some younger Muggleborns screamed, thinking they were monsters and shouting, "Go away!" But students who had been rescued began calling the elves little saviors. Some even slipped them candy or nuts, hoping for favors like skipping class or assistance against powerful opponents, of course forbidden. With everyone working together, the new game area took shape at a remarkable speed. After only a day and a half, the first trial run began, a miracle in everyone's eyes. Veed and the professors spread out, checking for hidden dangers and areas that needed improvement. Students formed a long line at the entrances while Filch, scowling, watched to make sure no one cut. Many, who were quickly escorted out by the house elves, ran straight back to the end of the line for another go. The reason students were so eager wasn't only that such a large-scale real-life game broke up the tedium of academic life. It was also the huge, constantly updating leaderboards near the entrance, the daily scoreboard, the single challenge scoreboard, and the total scoreboard. From the start, competition was fierce and rankings changed rapidly. Names scrolled continuously. Someone who had been first could tumble to the bottom in minutes, and someone else could unexpectedly surge to the top. Even holding first place for a few minutes was bragging rights material. A scoring game's power is the immediate feedback it gives, a constant stream of accomplishment and excitement. These students weren't wasting time in front of screens. To climb the boards, they had to study harder, master more spells, and deepen their knowledge across subjects. For that reason, the professors didn't forbid the game, they encouraged it. Next chapter update delayed until evening. The long line inched forward in fits and starts, looking from above like a slowly crawling snake. The trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, had started at the very back, but soon more than 10 people had clustered behind them. "It's almost dinner time," Ron said hopefully, watching the length of the queue. "I'm betting everyone will head off to eat, and it'll be our turn right away." "Everyone's thinking the same thing," Harry said flatly. Hermione bit her lip. "Listen, Michael and the others said they put some dangerous magical creatures in there, and plants Professor Sprout has been cultivating." "I really should have reread 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi and Fantastic Beasts before coming," Ron muttered. "Why don't we have care of magical creatures until third year?" "Probably because we wouldn't be allowed near the dangerous ones until then," Harry answered casually. Hermione visibly grew more nervous. "Shouldn't we get out of the line? I don't think my shield charm is ready." "No way, that would be too embarrassing. Look, there are even first years going in," Ron said, scowling. A Hufflepuff behind them piped up. "Potter, is this your first challenge?" Harry nodded. The boy grinned. "Don't worry, the first floor's got ordinary animals and plants. As long as you're careful, you won't get hurt. It'll be easy for you." "Yo, little Ronnie, Harry, Hermione, been waiting for you lot." A voice called from above. Before Harry could turn, Ron snapped, "I told you not to call me that, Fred." "When you can tell I'm George and not Fred, I'll stop calling you little Ronnie," one of the red-haired twins shot back. Ron went red. After all these years, even his mother couldn't always tell them apart. "George, what have you got?" Hermione asked. "Good question," George said, carrying a large cage covered with a green cloth. Strange squeaking came from underneath it, like a cage of mice. He plunged his hand inside and withdrew a thin, green, root-like creature with 2 tiny brown eyes and long vine-like fingers. "A bowtruckle!" Hermione exclaimed. "They guard trees and love woodlice." "Well said, Hermione. Shame I can't give you points for that," George teased. Then, with a mock flourish, he pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket, scribbled Hermione Granger on it, and showed it to the bowtruckle. The little thing clutched the paper and shyly crawled up onto Hermione's shoulder. Hermione looked at it warily. The bowtruckle looked back. Its eyes were the size of sesame seeds, so no emotion was obvious. "Protect these little guys," George said, passing them around, one to Harry, one to Ron. "They're bred at Mr. Scamander's estate," he added. "They're very intelligent, and they'll be your scorekeepers." "Scorekeepers?" Harry repeated. "Right," George grinned. "You can't expect a professor to follow every challenger and write down their progress. These will keep track for you." He was about to move on, then paused and added, "Oh, by the way, if your bowtruckle dies during the challenge, all your points reset to 0. Whether you can take the challenge again is anyone's guess." "What?" Ron shouted, horrified. "But they're so tiny." The bowtruckle responded by tugging angrily at Ron's hair. "That's why it's the ultimate challenge," George said, waving his hand. "Think about it. Such clever creatures aren't endless." He went off to hand out bowtruckles to the other first-timers. The 3 of them exchanged looks. "If something goes wrong, should we shield charm them?" Hermione suggested. Harry nodded. Ron, looking guilty, sighed. He still hadn't quite mastered the charm despite Harry's tutoring. He thought for a moment, and as they neared the entrance, his face lit up. He scooped up a few nutshells from the ground, stuck them together with a very crude sticking charm, and fashioned a tiny suit of armor for his bowtruckle. "I hope this helps," he told the little thing solemnly, "and you must protect yourself and not make me worry." The bowtruckle tapped the makeshift armor with its long fingers as if it found the thing uncomfortable. Then it was their turn. Ron went in first, then Harry, then Hermione. By the time Hermione stepped through the entrance a few seconds later, the other 2 were already gone. She had expected officials to let challengers in one at a time. There was no chance they'd be allowed to gather. She forced herself onwards. "It's only the first floor," she muttered. "It can't be that hard, right?" She turned to the bowtruckle on her shoulder. "How about I call you Glory? Do you like that name?" The little creature chirped and pointed off to the side. Hermione followed its gaze and saw a small, snow-white rabbit. Her face softened, and she reached out. The rabbit took a step back and let out a tiny squeak. Glory chirped again and pointed. Hermione froze. Suddenly, she realized she was surrounded by 7 or 8 rabbits. She took another step back, and the white rabbit leapt up and slammed into her. In the maze, the students' screams rose and fell. Ordinary animals could be quite alarming when they showed aggression. Up above, Vidi, acting as a temporary patrol, rode a thestral and circled the maze, watching. Ron was being chased by a flock of large geese, running with his hands on his head. After Hermione shook off the rabbits, she was swarmed by mischievous monkeys. She could handle them, but her reactions were a touch slower in a pinch. Harry, by contrast, was doing surprisingly well. He'd reached the second loop and was wrestling with a niffler to get his glasses back. He couldn't see the path clearly and stumbled several times, his clothes rumpled and his hair a mess. Neville had discovered the passage between the outer layer and the second loop, but had fallen into a trap and ended up hanging upside down. His luck never seemed to improve. Veed lingered for a bit, seeing Neville still struggling, but trying to sever the vines himself with a severing charm. Veed moved on to check other students. Theo had just been escorted out by a house elf. Ryan was still holding on in the third loop, but had been unnerved by several auguries whose mournful calls left him low in spirits. A red cap crept up behind him. Had Ryan not been snapped out of his sadness, he might have been eliminated. Veed noticed a house elf nearby guarding and eased back. Padma had just been frightened out by a boggart and eliminated. Rolf had made it into the third loop as well. This area was more suited to third years and above. Vedi thought of Rolf's background. He came from a family steeped in knowledge of these creatures and had fed many of them since childhood. If not for Hogwarts' own obstacles, Rolf might have stormed all the way to the seventh loop. From above, though, Veed saw Rolf trapped by one of Snape's riddles and unable to move for a while, so he went on to patrol another section. Then several screams echoed through the maze. Veedy flinched, and without instruction, the thestral under him dove toward the noise. There was a sickening thud. Under the terrified gazes of several girls, Harry was thrown backward as a line of blood burst from his chest. Unseen by the onlookers until then, a thestral had reared and brought a hoof down hard on the boy, flattening him to the ground. 170. Geraldine the Thestrals. At the critical moment, an exceptionally old house elf materialized beside Harry, grabbed his arm, and apparated him away. At the same time, 3 or 4 spells struck the attacking thestral, freezing it mid-air. One of the spells came from Veed. He had been on the creature's back and flipped free, then ran to check on Harry. Professor Sprout and Professor Snape arrived immediately afterward. "What happened?" Snape demanded, his face darkening as he fixed a dangerous stare on the terrified girls. "An invisible thing. It attacked Harry Potter." One of the little girls began to panic on the verge of tears. "A house elf took Harry away." Veed glanced at the girl's red hair, another Weasley. Hagrid hurried over, looking at the thestral suspended in midair, bewildered and worried. "But Geraldine's a gentle creature. She's never attacked anyone. What did that idiotic Gryffindor do first?" Snape asked coldly. "He provoked the thestral. Harry didn't do anything." Ginny Weasley found her courage and met the potions professor's gaze. "He just helped us drive away a Grindylow, and then the thestral attacked him." "I don't think it's Harry's fault, Professor," Veed added. "Look at this thestral," Veed said suddenly. "There's a wound on its back." Snape stepped closer and saw a long, thin wound near the thestral's hind leg, bleeding slightly. He sniffed twice, his hooked nose twitching. "The scent of gloomgrass." "Gloomgrass," Ginny echoed, confused. "Look it up in your textbooks," Snape said curtly. "Gloomgrass is an ingredient for a confusing potion. It can cause fear, palpitations, hallucinations, even manic behavior. So someone fed this thestral a potion?" Veed's expression turned serious. "Did they mean to use it to harm Harry, or to create chaos at Hogwarts?" Professor Sprout pried open the thestral's mouth and peered inside. "It's not a finished potion. There are still grass roots between its teeth. It looks like someone fed it a large amount of raw gloomgrass. I remember that grass mainly grows in East Africa and the Arabian regions," Veda said. "Its transport and sale are banned in most countries. But Britain and New Zealand allow restricted sales," he continued. "Still, it shouldn't be easy for ordinary people to get. As long as there's a channel, getting it is easier than you'd think." Snape said, "Besides, who would dare lay hands on a Hogwarts thestral?" "If I find out who did it, I'll make them pay," Hagrid growled. Ginny had been listening from the edge of the crowd, frozen in place. Her friend tugged at her sleeve, trying to pull her away, but Ginny couldn't move. When the conversation paused, she finally asked in a small voice, "Professor, where did Harry go?" "The house elf took him to the school infirmary," Snape said. His tone was icy and impatient, but compared to how he treated other Gryffindors, his manner toward Ginny was almost gentle. Veed looked at Ginny's hair and nodded. "Thank you, Professor," she whispered. Ginny didn't feel singled out, only reminded that Snape was as frightening as ever. She slipped away with her friend. By then, Dumbledore had arrived. He had been a step late because he'd gone to check on Harry and still had a smear of blood on his sleeve. "How is Harry, Dumbledore?" Hagrid demanded anxiously. "Just some superficial wounds. Madame Pomfrey will fix him quickly," Dumbledore said. He waved his wand lightly and inspected the thestral. After Professor Sprout explained their findings, he nodded. "Hagrid, take all the thestrals back to the stables. We'll need to do a thorough check." "What about Geraldine, sir?" Hagrid asked, nervously. "I know she hurt Harry, but it wasn't intentional. Geraldine's always been a good creature." "Of course. She's been used by someone with ill intent," Dumbledore said. "You'll keep an eye on her until the potion wears off." "All right, Professor." Hagrid sniffed, hefted the frozen thestral onto his shoulder, and carried it away. "Dumbledore," Snape objected. "A wild animal that has harmed people cannot be kept. There's a difference between actively attacking and being made to cause harm," Professor Sprout cut in. It was confused by the gloom grass and didn't know what it was doing. Dumbledore looked thoughtful for a moment, then turned to Veed. "Mr. Grey, what do you think?" Veed was startled to be addressed. Snape and Sprout both looked at him expectantly. He considered the situation and said, "We should let the students who were taking part in the challenge leave and suspend the project for now. Check every creature involved to see if any others have been tampered with. As for Geraldine, why not ask Harry? He's the victim here." Dumbledore nodded. "Very well." Snape snorted, casting a disapproving look at Veed that said he clearly thought the idea weak. Everyone knew Harry's relationship with Hagrid and his own temperament meant he would probably not press the issue. Veed chose to ignore Snape's glare. Snape was like that, rarely pleasant, but he answered questions and helped when asked. In the time Veed had been at Hogwarts, he'd only once heard Snape praise Malfoy. Otherwise, the professor's approval was a rare thing. After moving his brewing to the room of requirement because some of his potions took too long to make, Veed had stopped using the dungeons, and on 2 occasions on his way there, Snape had given him a cold shoulder and a sharp barb. Only later did Veed realize Snape's remarks, though harsh, meant, "Why aren't you continuing to practice? Don't give up halfway." After that, Veed had taken his recent work to Snape for review. The professor's verdict had been a brusque so-so and a warning, "Don't get carried away." 171. Suspicion. When Vadi emerged from the maze area, he found the Weasley twins leading a group of students, blocking the entrance and waving their arms while shouting, "Protest! Protest! Give us back the ultimate challenge. This was everyone's hard work. The school can't just shut it down. We want freedom. We want justice. We want the ultimate challenge." A mixed crowd of boys and girls, no longer sticking to house separations, chanted in succession. The noise scattered small creatures along the shore. Birds and other animals squealed and darted into the bushes. Vidi was surprised to see several pearly white figures among the students. More than half the school's ghosts had come, and for some reason they were joining the protest. Even Peeves was there, shouting shoulder to shoulder with Fred and George. Veed looked back, expecting the headmaster to speak, but Dumbledore had already gone. Professor McGonagall stood before the students, her wand raised to her throat as she spoke, angrily. "Silence!" Her voice rolled like thunder, like a roaring lion. Sound waves swept outward and sent ripples across the surface of the Black Lake. The lake gurgled as the giant squid that had surfaced to watch slipped beneath the water. The forbidden forest fell unnaturally quiet, insects seeming to stop mid-hum. The wind eased, the clouds hung still, and the students clapped hands over their ears, stunned. No one spoke. The area around the maze was so silent you could almost hear heartbeats. McGonagall lowered her wand, clasped her hands, and looked every inch the stern, dignified head of house. "A student was attacked by a thestral inside the maze," she said, controlling her anger. "We must suspend all activities. while we investigate the cause of the accident." Emboldened, Fred whispered, "We're not afraid of getting hurt." McGonagall's eyes narrowed. Fred hurried to correct himself. "No, I mean, we'll be careful, and we won't provoke the Thestral." "The Thestral was not provoked by any student's rude behavior," McGonagall replied. "It was fed a large amount of gloom grass. This is an extremely malicious act. Whoever is responsible had better own up at once. If I find out who did this, that person can expect to be sent home." She cast a pointed look at the more mischievous students. Most faces turned toward the Weasley twins. A few pupils also glanced suspiciously at certain Slytherins known for bad tempers. The twins immediately raised their hands. "We swear it wasn't us, Professor," they said in unison. George added, "Gloomgrass is expensive. I wouldn't waste money on it for a prank." At first, the crowd didn't believe the twins. Then George's offhand remark did the trick. Everyone from 1st through 6th year students and even a couple of recent graduates knew the Weasleys' finances. Most of the family made do with hand-me-downs. Only the eldest, Percy, and Ginny sometimes had anything new. Fred, George, and Ron were especially known for patched, older clothes. Everyone also knew Fred and George made money on the side and had some savings, but no one thought they'd spend a fortune on a dangerous, impractical plant just to pull a meaningless prank that might hurt someone. Percy glared and raised his hand. "Professor, may I ask who the injured student is?" McGonagall hesitated, then met the anxious looks and said, "Harry Potter. He was scratched by a thestral and has just been taken to the school infirmary." Ron and Hermione went pale, exchanged a look, and ran toward the infirmary. A ripple of gossip swelled through the students. Many now turned their suspicion toward the Slytherins. Even inside the Slytherin common room, some looked uneasily at peers who often sneered at Gryffindor and touted pure-blood claims. Draco Malfoy, Blaise Zabini, Theodore Nott, and older students like Foley and Yaxley. Several Slytherins suddenly felt isolated by their classmates. "Was it you, Draco?" Pansy asked quietly, eager to be confidant. "You can tell me, I'll keep your secret." Malfoy only scowled. "I wouldn't mind giving that scarhead a lesson," he muttered. "But it wasn't me. Some idiot did it." He glanced toward a cluster of Slytherin boys. Pansy followed his gaze, but it landed on several gloomy faces, revealing nothing. "No matter what," she said, forcing a smile. "I always back you." McGonagall, though she likely had her own suspects, had no proof and could not accuse anyone. She reiterated precautions and warned explicitly that sneaking into the maze at night was forbidden, glancing pointedly at the twins, and that students caught breaking the rules would face severe discipline. Gradually, the crowd dispersed, disappointed. As the students left, the bowtruckles slipped back into the hedges one after another. "Can I keep it?" "I think it likes me, and I like it very much," Luna asked Professor Kettleburn. The old magazoologist didn't refuse outright. "Ask it yourself," he smiled. "If it agrees, I have no objection." Luna beamed and reached for the creature, but the bowtruckle burrowed into the hedge, showing only its back. "Oh, it seems it doesn't quite agree," Kettleburn teased. Luna's face fell as she watched it disappear. "Do you like bowtruckles?" Rolf Scamander asked as he noticed her. "They're very cute," Luna said. "Like friends. Crumplehorn Snorkax are cute too, but bigger, I think." Rolf didn't argue the point. Instead, he produced a tiny bowtruckle from his pocket. "This is my friend, Agile. Among all bowtruckles, I like him the most." Little Agile curled around Rolf's finger, his twin leaves bobbing. "That's lovely. He's willing to come with you," Luna said, envious. "You can shake his hand. He's very gentle," Rolf offered. Fred and George found Veed nearby. "Hey, Veed, I have an idea," Fred said, looping an arm around Veed's shoulder. "What idea?" Veed asked. "You know the disillusionment charm." Fred began. "People think we're suspects. To clear our names, we're willing to take a small risk," George added. "We've never been afraid to explore any part of Hogwarts. Ahem, sneak into places. While everyone's gone back to the castle, you cast a disillusionment charm on me and we'll slip into—" "Don't tell me you want to sneak into the Slytherin common room," Veed interrupted. "I knew you'd think of that," George said, delighted. "It's perfect. If a Slytherin did this, they'll be bragging in there. We just need to listen, and the truth will come out." Fred looked expectant. Veed shrugged. "Not really," he said, and started toward the infirmary. "You're forgetting someone," he added as they followed. At the start of term, Harry mentioned a house elf who tried to stop him from returning to school. Fred and George exchanged looks. That would be someone annoying, like Malfoy using a house elf to plague him, right? Fred guessed. That's unlikely. Veed said, if Malfoy could get a house elf into Harry's home to torment him, why would Harry have been left alone all these years? There are many who escaped punishment. Surely some would want revenge on Harry Potter. George frowned, a thought forming. Are you saying? I'm saying Dumbledore must have set very powerful protective enchantments around Harry's place, Veed went on. Anyone with malicious intent wouldn't be able to find or reach him. That's why he's never been successfully targeted. 172, A Night at Hogwarts. Wait a minute. George suddenly frowned at a contradiction. According to this, the reason that House Elf found Harry was because he wasn't malicious? He actually wanted to protect Harry? Fred finished almost at the same time. Veed nodded. He might genuinely believe Hogwarts was in danger, so he didn't want Harry to come back. He has a rather unique way of protecting people, Fred said dryly. If that's the case, why do you suspect that house elf again? Fred pressed. What's his name? Dobby, George answered. I remember Harry saying he called himself Dobby. House elves live differently and think differently from us, Veed said. Just like last time, he may have thought Hogwarts was dangerous and preferred Harry to be expelled rather than return. Maybe this time he was worried something bad would happen if Harry stayed. So he sent him to St. Mungo's first? Fred guessed. George hesitated. What danger could there be at Hogwarts? The safest place is... He stopped, the words choking off as the memory of Voldemort's infiltration last year made the thought hard to finish. The biggest danger this term might be the maze challenge. Fred turned to the huge silhouette of the maze visible in the night. Could Harry have met you-know-who inside the maze? Who knows, Veed said. Dobby is one possibility, or a Slytherin student, as you suggested, or a Death Eater in disguise, or just an accident. Anyway, Fred said, before we go sneaking into the Slytherin common room, I'd rather ask Harry if he has any clues. Veed suspected Dobby, but didn't say so outright. His prophetic insights had been shaky lately. His metaphorical butterfly wings had fluttered too hard and altered things from how they were supposed to unfold, so he didn't want to overcommit. Fortunately, Harry answered for him soon enough and eased the worry that the world had veered too far off track. It was that house elf, Dobby, Harry said indignantly from the hospital bed. I met him in the maze. I thought he was one of the school's rescue house elves, but then I saw his clothes and I knew who he was. What did he say? Hermione asked. He said he'd warned me and asked why I'd come back to school, Harry said, his face a mix of anger and disgust at being stalked. He also said, since that's the case, being badly injured and sent home is better than being here. Did he say what the danger at Hogwarts was? Veed asked. Harry hesitated, trying to recall. He mentioned something about history repeating itself, the Chamber of Secrets being opened again. I don't know what that means. What Chamber of Secrets? As for the Chamber of Secrets, George mused, rubbing his chin. I've read something like that in a book before. Hermione frowned. I'll go look it up later. The door to the infirmary swung open and Neville and Theo came in. Harry, are you feeling any better? We brought you some food from the Great Hall. The noise roused Lockhart on the adjacent bed. He blinked groggily, sat up, and asked, Is it morning? Why is it so noisy? Lockhart's eyes landed on Neville as he walked past. Good evening, Professor. Are you feeling better? Neville offered. Much better, Longbottom. You came to visit me and even brought cake. How kind. Lockhart reached for the cake with exaggerated gratitude. He looked around at the students and proclaimed, with his usual flourish, Don't worry, children. This was just a small mishap. Your favorite professor, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, will be in class on time tomorrow. The students exchanged awkward, polite smiles. Fred muttered to his brother, If we swapped his medicine, could we keep him in the infirmary 2 more days? George ground his teeth. Do you want to be personally disowned by Madame Pomfrey? Hogwarts was now fully wrapped in night. Veed stood at the window watching Hagrid patrol the perimeter of the maze by lantern light, a thestral following behind, its leathery wings occasionally flapping. Hagrid intercepted a few students loitering near the entrance and shepherded them back to the castle. It wasn't curfew yet, so Hagrid didn't give them detention, just the sort of fierce scolding that made teenagers scurry like children who had discovered a new game online. Danger be damned, they couldn't resist the thrill. As the night deepened, the castle lights thinned, while the edge where the forbidden forest met the maze thrummed with life. Creatures peered out from the trees. Hogwarts' architecture had stood unchanged for centuries, but the sudden presence of a giant maze was a novelty even for the denizens of the forest. Luminous unicorns grazed at the fringe with their foals, some wandering boldly into the outer paths of the maze under Hagrid's gentle coaxing. Several centaurs lingered in the shadow of large trees, bows at the ready, watching the maze and murmuring among themselves before slipping away. Faint lights blinked at the forest's edge as nocturnal creatures slipped out to watch. In the Black Lake, the giant squids surfaced again, and heads of oddly shaped merpeople broke the surface, their features like weathered stones set against the water. The students owned the daytime excitement. The animals seemed to take over the night. Vade wondered briefly if the professors could persuade such beings to serve as the maze's NPCs. He dismissed the idea. There might be magics that could bind creatures from harming students, but intelligent creatures in the magical world were fiercely proud. They feared wizards and yet looked down on humans. Wizards often thought the same of them. Contracts could restrain, but they wouldn't buy willing cooperation. The maze sank further into the darkness. A soft rustle behind him told Vede that a house elf had come to tidy the room. "Zoe?" he called, turning. The house elf curtsied. "Of course, Mr. Gray. What can I do for you?" "There's a house elf who may have snuck into the school recently. His name is Dobby, and he wears rags. If you see him, could you bring him to me?" Vede asked. "Certainly, Mr. Gray," Zoe replied, bowing again. She turned and slipped away to carry out his request. 173. The Parrot Whisperer. Zoe is happy to help Vede Gray catch the bad house elf Dobby. As soon as Zoe finds him, Zoe will catch him. Zoe said it softly, eyes bright with enthusiasm, like a child delighted to be needed. "Thank you, Zoe," Vede smiled. "If he resists, please tell him for me that if he wishes to be free, I can help." Zoe's round eyes studied Vede carefully. "How can a house elf want to leave its owner?" she asked, puzzled. "He really is a bad elf." "You can't say that," Vede answered, shaking his head. "Hogwarts is a very good place for house elves. As long as they do their work, they aren't treated harshly." "But Zoe," Vede went on, "some privately owned house elves live worse than slaves. They are beaten and scolded and severely mistreated. It's only natural they might want to leave." Zoe frowned and shook her head. Zoe cannot understand, but Zoe will help. Zoe will never refuse Vede Gray's request. Vede smiled. "Thank you, Zoe. It's truly wonderful to know you." The next morning, Vede's first action was the same as always. He checked the mandrake leaf tucked under his tongue in the mirror. It was still in place, intact. He poured a cup of tea and rinsed his mouth, then popped a piece of chewing gum in. After a few days, he'd grown used to the leaf. It no longer interfered with his speech or movements. A sticking charm before bed kept him from biting or swallowing it in his sleep. The only real irritation was that he couldn't brush his teeth. Cleaning charms and rinsing helped, but not brushing left him uncomfortable and less inclined to talk. Among his classmates, only Michael knew Vede had been practicing becoming an animagus. Everyone else simply thought he'd grown quieter. He had always been reserved, so it hadn't seemed like much of a change. Hermione had been spending more time in the library lately, and when they gathered in their common room, Umbrella House, as the students jokingly called it, she'd even asked everyone to help read through books she couldn't finish on her own. "Hermione, how are we supposed to finish all this?" Neville complained, clutching the pile she'd given him. "You don't have to read every word," Hermione said, handing the last few books to Vede. "We're looking for legends about the Chamber of Secrets at Hogwarts." "The Chamber of Secrets?" The group exchanged glances. "That house elf said the chamber was going to be opened. I don't think it's just gossip. There has to be something to it." Hermione pushed her hair back and said, "I remember reading about the chamber before, but I can't recall the details." "But why investigate?" Padma raised a hand as if speaking to a teacher. "Nothing dangerous has happened at school." "At least one danger has. Fred announced, earning a chorus of attention. He adopted a solemn, melodramatic tone. I have a bottle of poison here. After class, I'll make one of you drink it. I hope the antidote you brew passes the test, otherwise. He didn't finish the sentence, merely twisting his lips into a mean smile. Oh, Snape, Harry groaned. Neville beside him looked equally uneasy. It's Professor Snape, Neville said, mortified. Hermione slammed a hand on the table. Listen, we can't wait until something happens to start worrying. If we research this now, if something does happen, we won't be completely unprepared. What if nothing happens? Harry asked. Then you'll have gained useful knowledge, Hermione replied firmly. Grumbling and sighing, the book-averse members of the group surrendered to Hermione's determined insistence. They spread the work out, and a day later, Ryan found a clue in a yellowed notebook. After a fierce quarrel with Gryffindor, Slytherin finally left the school, Ryan read aloud. Before he left, he built a secret room and left terrible things inside the Chamber of Secrets. Only when his true heir returns to the school can the chamber be opened. Terror will purify the school, cleansing away those unworthy of learning magic. What terrifying things? Theo asked. Ryan flipped to the end of the notebook and shook his head. No one knows. The author suggests it's some kind of monster only Slytherin can control. No, that's not quite right, Michael said, thinking aloud. Maybe Slytherin's heir can control it. Could be a magical contract that passes through a bloodline. It's probably a snake, Veed had said. What? Several heads turned to him, puzzled. Slytherin was a Parselmouth. Veed met Harry's startled look and explained, Salazar Slytherin could speak to snakes. That was his gift. Harry sat in stunned silence. Michael slapped a palm to his forehead. Exactly. If Parseltongue runs in the bloodline, Slytherin's descendants could talk to snakes and even control them. So the monster might be a snake? Padma asked. What sort of snake would be powerful enough? Veed said nothing more. The others began to list possibilities. Runespore, Occamy, the basilisk, sea snakes, taipans, mambas, then agreed to split up the research. Harry, are you all right? Michael asked suddenly, noticing Harry's pale face. Harry looked around at everyone and hesitated. Aye. Stomachache? Neville offered helpfully. Didn't finish your homework and want to copy, Hermione said, a practical edge in her voice. Or you're short on time to research? Your scar again? Theo guessed. Under their concerned gazes, Harry finally stammered. Is talking to snakes? Is it very rare? Aren't a lot of wizards able to do that? No, Theo said. Parseltongue is extremely rare. The most famous Parselmouth was Salazar Slytherin. Why would you think it's common? Michael laughed at the idea. It's not like you can speak Parseltongue yourself, Harry. Did you ever hear someone say? Michael's words trailed off. He looked at Harry, eyes widening. Harry said nothing at first. Then Hermione, seeing how pale he'd gone, asked softly, Harry, you're not a Parselmouth, are you? Harry looked at her and then nodded slowly. I am. 174. Learning Parrot Whisper. You're a Parselmouth? You can talk to snakes? After a long pause, Neville repeated it as if he still couldn't believe his ears. Harry felt a rush of relief at having confessed and explained in detail. Once at the zoo, I opened the glass of a python's enclosure. I don't know how I did it. I didn't even know I was a wizard back then. As it left, it thanked me. It said goodbye. A snake thanked you? Ryan's disbelief showed on his face. Did it speak English or? Harry thought for a moment. It sounded like English, but with an accent. Like someone speaking through clenched teeth. Why don't you try it now? Veed said, pointing his wand at the quill on the table. The turquoise quill twisted and in an instant became a small green snake. It slithered across the surface, lifting its triangular head from time to time. Say something to it, Harry. Give it a command. All of them looked at him. Padma and Hermione instinctively leaned back to put distance between themselves and the snake. Harry stared at the conjured snake, hesitated, then said, Hello? Can you coil up? The snake regarded him, then obediently coiled, lifting its head and flicking its forked tongue as if ready for the next order. Harry felt his tension ease. There was a curious familiarity in the animal's submissive response. He glanced at the others, trying to read their faces, and a small panic fluttered in his chest. It seems you didn't even notice you were hissing just now, Veedy said thoughtfully. Like a snake speaking. How marvelous, he continued. Learning a language usually takes memory and practice. Parcel mouths, they don't learn it the same way. It's like their brains have a built-in translator. Harry relaxed and asked casually, "Does Parseltongue sound strange to others?" "It gives you goosebumps," Vidi said, imitating Harry's hiss. "Things you don't understand always seem more advanced." He then asked, "What did you just say?" Harry answered in a low hiss. Vidi held up his hands and laughed. "Harry, please speak in English." "Oh." Harry realized he'd slipped into Parseltongue again. He translated. It meant, "Hello, please coil up." "Then how do you say thank you?" Vidi asked, eager to learn. Harry taught him the hiss for gratitude. "And don't move?" Vidi practiced. "Open? Attack? Play dead?" Vidi took notes while Harry, pleased to be helpful, guided him through the sounds. The strange hissing and panting filled the room, but the earlier chill faded. They looked at one another, and Hermione, ever the studious one, was the first to pull out her notebook. Fred and George watched, amused. "What are we learning this for?" Fred asked. George just shrugged. "Doesn't mean it's not cool." Vidi tapped the quill snake coiled by Harry with the tip of his pen. "The most incredible thing about a Parselmouth is that they can even control snakes conjured by magic. Logically, this snake should obey my commands, but it listened to Harry." "So Parseltongue isn't just talking to real snakes," someone murmured. Vidi mused. "Magical snakes seem to obey Parselmouths intrinsically, like a superior and subordinate." "Harry, are you descended from Slytherin?" Michael asked. Neville added hesitantly, "I've seen a lot of pure-blood family trees. The Potters don't appear to be linked to Slytherin." "Don't be so sure," Fred said, putting an arm around Neville's shoulder. "Slytherin lived over 1,000 years ago. Who knows how many times his descendants have married into other families? People disowned by pure-blood families aren't always recorded, and their descendants less so." "The Potter family hasn't produced any known Parselmouths," Theo said. "Maybe it comes from your mother's side." "Then why are you in Gryffindor?" Michael asked. "The Sorting Hat should have put you in Slytherin." "That's a bit of a secret," Harry said. He hesitated, then admitted, "Actually, the Sorting Hat wanted to put me in Slytherin at first, but I refused." Everyone nodded approvingly. The professors took a week to inspect the maze. Apart from finding some residual gloom grass in the stables, they found nothing else. The other creatures in the maze hadn't been fed anything unusual. They went about their routines as before. With student protests and no conclusive evidence, the maze was set to reopen on Saturday afternoon. But that same day held a bigger event, Gryffindor versus Slytherin in Quidditch. The match had already been postponed twice. With Sirius's case being retried, Ministry officials had come to Hogwarts repeatedly to question students. The Weasley brothers and Harry, who shared a dormitory, had been called in several times, so the match had been pushed back to the end of November. This week, it was Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Next week would be Ravenclaw versus Hufflepuff. As the first Quidditch match of term approached, tensions between Gryffindor and Slytherin rose again. At 11, teachers and students began making their way to the Quidditch pitch. Vidi had gone to the room of requirement on the 8th floor, opened the disappearing cabinet, and a sleek, shiny black dog had darted out. It ran 2 quick laps around the room, then transformed into a tall, slim man with black hair and gray eyes. He wore deep gray robes. His hair was short and neat, his cheeks filled out, and his bright eyes gave him an appealing handsomeness. "You're Vidi? Vidi Gray?" Sirius said rapidly. Without waiting, he dropped into a bow and extended his hand. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Gray. You've given me a new chance." "Hello, Mr. Black," Vidi replied, shaking the offered hand. "I greatly admire your loyalty and courage." They smiled at each other. Both had black hair and gray eyes. Sirius's eyes drooped at the corners, giving a dog-like softness. Vidi's were rounder, with a slight upward tilt. Lupin also stepped out of the cabinet. "Remus, hurry up." Sirius chattered. "The match is about to start. I want to watch Harry play. Let's go." Before Lupin could answer, Sirius shifted back into the large black dog. The animal's body seemed to affect his demeanor. He spun twice, wagged his tail, and bolted for the door. "Wait, Sirius." Lupin grabbed the dog's tail. The dog yelped and nearly leapt 3 feet into the air, glaring at Lupin in annoyed surprise. "Sorry," Lupin said, releasing his grip. "You've registered your animagus form with the Ministry, and your transformed appearance is too conspicuous. Students would recognize you instantly." Sirius thought, then shook his head reluctantly. His ears dropped, but he sidled up to Lupin anyway. Lupin tapped him with his wand and cast a disillusionment charm. The black dog seemed to fade into nothing and then, as if impatient, opened the door with its paws and rushed outside like a gust of wind. Sirius hopes Harry will spot him in the stands, Lupin told Veed. It's fortunate he didn't insist on being obvious. Veed was quiet for a moment, then asked, "If you have to disillusion him, what's the point of turning into a black dog in the first place?" Lupin grinned sheepishly. "Ah, right. I forgot to explain that." Veed looked at him and said dryly, "You were doing it on purpose, weren't you?" 175. Friendship and Competition. Ever since Sirius's release, Veed felt his image of Lupin as a gentle, magnanimous elder begin to crack. Lupin had become livelier, and now and then he let a sly, cunning edge show through. With Veed, though, he remained the same patient, tolerant friend. Looking out the window, Lupin said, "Let's go. The vanishing cabinet has been put back where you said." Veed had meant to leave, but when he noticed Lupin's glance toward the distant Quidditch pitch, he changed his mind. "You want to watch Harry's match too, don't you?" he asked. Lupin shook his head. "There will be plenty of matches later. If you think we need to act now, the important matter comes first." "My business is important, but the match isn't nothing," Veed said. He pushed the cabinet door closed with the back of his hand. "Harry flies brilliantly. Professor McGonagall said he flies as well as his father. Watching the match before we go won't slow us much," Veed continued, "but we should get to the pitch quickly." Lupin hesitated, then smiled and accepted Veed's kindness. He slipped a disillusionment charm over himself and followed Veed out of the room. They hurried for the Quidditch stands. Lightning forked like a serpent across the sky, and distant thunder rolled. Lupin glanced up. "Looks like rain." Veed looked up too, and then laughed. "I don't know why, but important matches always seem to happen on gloomy, rainy days." Lupin smiled. "What's the connection?" "Muggle films like to set big moments against stormy weather," Veed said. "You talk about Muggle things a lot, and a lot of your inventions borrow from them." "That's unusual," Lupin said. "Most of the wizards I know who came from Muggle families avoid mentioning Muggle life. Once they become adults, they choose the wizarding world and keep it separate." "Why would I avoid Muggles?" "I come from them," Veed shot back. "The witch hunts ended centuries ago, yet the two worlds are still so isolated. I find that hard to accept." Lupin considered that. "Perhaps a lot of people outwardly look down on Muggles, but secretly fear them. For us, the worst punishment is the killing curse," he went on softly, "and that sort of darkness can twist a person. But Muggles—" "I read that Muggles invented some terrifying punishments for their own," Veed said. "Cruel beyond imagination. Bathilda Bagshot didn't even include some of them in History of Magic." Lupin's voice grew heavy. "The horrors of wizards are no less. Think of Grindelwald. How many people like that can kill without a second thought? Some are born cruel. Most, though, are twisted by the dark arts. Killing scars the soul in ways that can't be mended." Veed thought of Tom Riddle, the handsome face turned monstrous, and of a soul torn to pieces and the body warped by it. Under the low sky, their talk trailed off, both slipping into darker thoughts, until an enormous cheer from the stands shattered the quiet. "Looks like the match has started," Lupin said, and they climbed to the highest tier to find a few empty seats. They sat, and, like everyone else, watched the players cutting through the rain. Suddenly something furry brushed Vady, and two barks sounded. "Sirius?" Sirius, invisible like them, replied, "I'm right here." A momentary panting ended as Sirius remembered he couldn't be seen and scolded himself. "I forgot. I'm invisible now. I don't have to transform. Remus, Vita, you're late. You almost missed the start." He didn't seem to notice Lupin teasing him. "You have 4 legs. Of course you run faster than us," Lupin said. Sirius forgot the tease and burst out excitedly. "Can you tell which one's Harry Remus? The one who flies highest. That's him. He flies like James." Veed leaned back and listened to the two invisible friends talking, feeling a quiet admiration. Anyone who'd spent 11 years in Azkaban might have come out broken, bitter, withdrawn, or worse. But Sirius showed none of that darkness. His frame was still thinner than normal, but his spirit was fighting back. Veed felt relief. The old, spirited Sirius was returning, with friends helping him toward life instead of letting him be trapped by despair. No wonder Lupin had seemed more lively. Perhaps he was helping Sirius in his own way. The two teams tumbled and tangled in the sky, and Sirius's running commentary made the game twice as thrilling. Veed began to follow the action more clearly. A chill slid across his forehead. He closed his eyes for an instant, raised his wand, and murmured a charm. A ring of air sprang from the tip and spread into an invisible umbrella over their seats, large enough to cover all three of them. "Perfect," Sirius said gratefully. "I hate getting wet." Veed felt a watchful gaze and turned to see Professor Dumbledore nodding slightly, a kindly smile on his face. Veed said nothing. "Remus," Veed murmured, "I think Dumbledore knows we're here. Is that so?" Lupin sighed. "It's not surprising. A skilled wizard can detect traces of a disillusionment charm." "As long as Professor McGonagall doesn't notice," Sirius said casually, "Dumbledore will pretend he doesn't see us." He watched the rain and frowned. "Harry wears glasses, so the rain bothers him more than the others. I wonder if he knows a waterproofing charm." Veed watched the teams weaving high above them and wondered whether a bludger would run amok this time. The bludgers were whipped about by the weather and the players' bats, and the tactic of steering them at chasers was common. In the poor light and rain, it was hard to judge odd trajectories. Zoe and the others were ready. Would Dobby come? The rain came down harder, driving sheets of water across the stands and making it difficult to follow the match. Anyone without an umbrella had to cup a hand over their eyes to keep the rain out. Still, almost no one wanted to leave the pitch. Students shaded their faces with their hands and squinted through the downpour, trying to track the blur of broomsticks slicing through the gray. Then a sharp whistle sounded, and Harry, arm raised, circled overhead on his broom. The Gryffindor players screamed and lunged toward him. Madame Hooch announced the victory, and the stands finally exploded into cheers. Malfoy watched from the opposite end, his face drained of color. The Slytherin captain flew over, shouting something at him. "That was incredible. Did you see him catch the snitch, Remus?" "It was brilliant. He took it right past the other seeker's ear." Sirius cheered and clapped so loudly, Veed was sure he had leapt several times. "Veed, who was that Slytherin seeker?" Sirius called. "Draco Malfoy," Veed answered. "Lucius Malfoy's son?" Sirius bared his teeth. "That silver-tongued serpent." "Good job, Harry. Knock that Malfoy off his broom," Sirius hollered. "Quiet, Sirius," Lupin snapped. "Do you want us to be discovered?" There were no students seated very near Veed and his friends, but someone a few rows ahead had already turned back to look. Seeing only Veed, he smiled politely and went back to watching. Sirius relaxed and turned to Lupin. "Remus, doesn't Harry look just like he did in his 4th year? I remember James. He used to show off to Lily and fly right in front of her. And then Snape knocked him off." Gasps cut him off. Players from both teams were arguing in midair. A large Slytherin hurled a bludger that struck wood and sent him spiraling from his broom. The Weasley Twine's brooms clipped several other players and girls screamed. Dumbledore stretched out a hand and, from across the pitch, slowed Wood's fall so he hovered just above the ground. "Stop! All of you! Stop!" Madame Hooch dived into the chaos like a hunting hawk. "Whoever continues will be disqualified," she cried, and her voice shut the fight down. The players drifted apart, still muttering and cursing. Then a thin figure dropped straight out of the sky. "Harry!" Sirius shouted, scrambling down the stands, but Lupin grabbed him. Wands flashed from both the teachers' box and the stands as several people flung spells to catch the falling boy. "That's good. Thank you," Lupin said quickly, folding his wand away. They hurried down the steps, trying not to jostle the other students. Harry was on the ground, clutching his arm, and already a crowd had gathered. Lockhart, dressed like a peacock in green, was pushing people aside, brandishing his wand and calling out, "Stand back, everyone. This is a simple spell. I can mend him in a second. Trust me, I've done it dozens of times." Harry moaned on the wet grass, his words lost beneath the rain. Veed froze. He had his wand half raised to stop Lockhart, then lowered it and forced himself to concentrate on Lockhart's movements instead. Lupin and Sirius did not yet know that this was the Lockhart Harry was always complaining about. They had the instinct to defer to a professor and so stood back. Lockhart flourished his wand dramatically, aimed at Harry's arm and intoned, "Brachiamendo." A heartbeat later, Harry's arm hung like a limp glove. A shocked silence fell over the crowd, then a collective gasp. His arm looked as if it had no bones. Wood, blood running from his head, had been hoping for a proper healer. When he saw what had happened, he scrambled away, hands over his own head, terrified. Alicia Spinnet stepped in front of Wood as if protecting him from some hideous creature. Lockhart laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. "Ah, well, these things happen sometimes. No harm done. Harry, you won't be in pain at least. To the infirmary. Madame Pomfrey will put it right." He hurried off in a flurry of robes, as if he'd just heard a beast's roar behind him. "I'll kill him," Sirius snarled, teeth bared. "Now," Lupin murmured, tugging at Sirius's sleeve. "We didn't come properly. Remember? We snuck in." Sirius strained, angry, but Lupin led him away toward the castle. Vidi slipped his wand out and, without making a scene, cast a levitation charm on Sirius's robes. The billowing material lifted and snagged, throwing the angry man off balance so Lupin could haul him along. Sirius kicked and flailed, but Lupin's grip was firm. "We'll teach him a lesson later," Sirius grumbled. Madame Pomfrey could normally mend a broken arm in seconds, but she could do nothing when the bones had been removed. Growing the bones back would take the skelegro she poured into Harry and a night's rest at least. Ron drew the curtains around the bed and helped Harry into pajamas. Madame Pomfrey made him swallow a large cup of skelegro and then shoot away the crowd of students. "He needs to sleep. Out, all of you." In a shadowed corner of the infirmary, 3 figures remained under a disillusionment charm. Regrowing bones wasn't quick work. Once Pomfrey had gone out to fetch something and the ward door clicked, Harry, lying on the bed and groaning, endured the pain. "Lift the charm, Remus," Sirius said in a hoarse voice. "All right." Lupin obliged, and the cloak of visibility vanished. Harry sat up quickly, eyes wide. "Sirius, Remus, and Vede, how did you get in here?" "I watched your match," Sirius said, grinning despite the worry. "It was glorious. You flew so well." Harry smiled despite the throbbing in his arm, as if the pain had been pushed back for a moment. After a little more talk, Lupin and Vede prepared to leave, but Sirius planted himself in a chair and showed no sign of going. "You two go on," he said sullenly. "I'll stay with him tonight." "Harry should be asleep," Lupin protested. "I'll watch him sleep," Sirius insisted stubbornly. "I won't wake him." "All right," Lupin sighed and let him be. "And don't get caught." "I know." Sirius paused. "Give me my wand back." Earlier that morning, when he'd turned into his animagus to go out, Sirius had given Lupin his wand for safekeeping. Lupin handed it back. They said their goodbyes and left the ward. Vede glanced over once more as the two of them slipped away. Sirius sat by the bedside, head bowed, talking softly to Harry, loyal and watchful, like a great black dog at the foot of the bed. 177, Gaunt House. For the British, pubs were more than places to drink. They were social centers. People gathered, talked, watched the telly, and squeezed a little leisure out of their busy days. Even in the smallest villages, you could expect to find 1 or 2 pubs. Mike ran the only one in Little Hangleton. At noon, he polished glasses and chatted with regulars. "I heard 2 outsiders came yesterday?" Pete, a regular, asked. "Yeah," Mike said, smiling in a way that suggested he enjoyed gossip. 2 men booked 1 room. "Oh, they're that kind of relationship, then." Pete understood and frowned. There had been more public talk lately about accepting different orientations, even whispers of same-sex marriage laws, but in a place like this, an old man like Pete still carried prejudice. "Do you know where they're from?" he asked. Mike shrugged. "I didn't ask. But from their accent, sounds a bit like London. They say dis instead of this." Footsteps on the stairs made Mike wink at Pete, and the two fell silent. Pete turned his head toward the stairwell. First came a man in his middle years. Dark suit, robe left open, hair touched with gray. Nothing flashy, but there was a quiet strength to him. Pete snorted inwardly. Then the person behind him stepped down, and Pete's drink sprayed from his mouth. He stared at Mike in outrage. "What's wrong?" Mike asked, puzzled. "That's still a child!" Pete hissed, leaning close. He must be traveling with an older man. "Damn you, telling everyone there were 2 men together when it's an adult with a child." "What child?" "I didn't," Mike protested, glancing up, and both men went silent as the 2 guests emerged from upstairs. For a moment, they simply stared. Vede and Lupin walked out of the pub and looked around. The last time Vidi had been here, rushed side by side with Dumbledore, he'd barely noticed anything. Standing now on the village's wide main road, he could clearly see the large, deserted house on the hillside. Two boys sped down toward the road on bicycles. The lame gardener of Riddle Manor waved his cane and gave chase, shouting angrily, but the children were too quick and laughed without restraint. "Are we going there?" Lupin asked, standing beside him. "No," Vede said. "Lord Voldemort's father lived in that house once. We're going the other way, toward the place his mother came from." Lupin blinked. The information landed like a surprise he hadn't expected. He fell silent for a moment, turning the names over in his head. Vidi, with the casual air of a sightseer, led the way out of the village along a narrow path, and then, from his cloak, produced a bottle labeled Water of Life and Death. It was a powerful sedative. Vede pointed his wand at it and whispered a single word, Misty. Under his command, the potion diffused into the air as a pale mist. It rolled into the village like a tide and touched everything. The boys who had just ridden down the hills suddenly felt drowsy. They abandoned their bikes, found a shady patch on the lawn, yawned, and fell asleep. Back inside the pub, Pete, still fuming, had already dozed off with his head on the table. Mike rubbed his eyes, muttered he'd take a quick nap, and was asleep before the words were out. On the hillside, the lame gardener's eyelids drooped, his cane clattered to the ground, and he slumped into a chair, snoring within seconds. In a dozen other small ways, the village quieted. Ants on a telegraph pole slowed, rats in burrows stilled, watchdogs went limp. Lupin watched in astonishment. No one's ever used a potion like that on the weather. Your control of it is incredible. Scamander taught me, Vede said simply. I owe a lot to him. How long will they sleep on that dilution? Lupin asked. 2, maybe 3 hours, Vede answered. Enough time for us to get our work done without interference. They followed a tangled footpath toward the ruined house that had once belonged to the Gaunts. Vede took the walk as an opportunity to explain. On the day of Sirius's retrial, Dumbledore brought me here then. He showed me the arc of Tom Riddle's life, he said. Both of his parents were born near this village. His mother, Merope Gaunt, she used a love potion on a Muggle youth from that large house over there. That's how Voldemort came to be. Merope was a descendant of Slytherin. Lupin's brow knit. You said before your fiendfire theory was ready for practical use? Rather than setting fire to some unknown cave, Vede replied, I'd prefer to test it here. This is a densely wooded area, Lupin warned. Using fiendfire here is dangerous. If it gets out of control, it could start a wildfire. Vede grinned. You're here with me, aren't you? If my spell runs wild, I trust you'll rein it in. Lupin gave a small smile. Of course. There was a pause, and Lupin asked, Is this Dumbledore's task? No, it's my idea, Vede said quickly. He didn't want Dumbledore to know. He feared that if the old headmaster caught wind of this place, he'd become obsessed with some relic, perhaps the Resurrection Stone, and abandon the rest of them. If that happened, this whole trip back would turn into a disaster, maybe worse. Better not to involve him. They'd walked a good while before the small house, half hidden by bramble and weeds, came into view. Lupin raised his wand. Ready? We should clear the surroundings first. 178, burning down the Gaunt house. Vede had always thought Lupin was a good person. Now he realized he was even better than he'd imagined. Vede had given his share of help to others and learned how differently people reacted. Some, when helped, behaved as if they were owed something, lecturing from a high horse or making endless demands with no thought of repayment. Others felt humiliated by charity and avoided their benefactors. A few even seemed to hope those who helped them would fall into ruin, as if that would restore balance to their own consciences. Lupin was nothing like that. He was gentle and tolerant as water, never patronizing when he taught Vede magic, never ingratiating when he took on work. If something Vede wanted to do was dangerous, he would try to dissuade him softly. But when Vede made up his mind, no matter how odd, Lupin would help him do it without prying under the pretense of, it's for your own good. That made their partnership comfortable, especially for someone like Vede, who carried many secrets. For instance, Lupin didn't ask what Vede had discussed with Dumbledore last time, where his information had come from, or why he wanted to burn down the decaying Gaunt house, nearly swallowed by undergrowth. He simply devised a plan and got to work. Next to the house stood a huge tree with gnarled roots. Its branches pierced the roof and drooped down. All the glass was shattered, tall nettles crowded over more than half the windows, and the narrow panes were crusted with dust. Fortunately, the plants had withered long ago, so clearing them wouldn't be too hard. Incendio! Vede and Lupin shouted together, pointing their wands. The dry grass at their feet erupted in flame with a whoosh. If they'd released full control then, the blaze would have raced through everything flammable like a natural fire. Instead, they held it tight. The flames followed the sweep of their wands, moving outward from both sides until they met and formed a great ring of fire. Lupin had explained fire control to Vede more than once. Some witches and wizards used bizarre aids, shouting spells, adopting strange postures, glaring at the flames with bloodshot eyes, or employing odd magical tools. But at base, the key was firm, clear intent, undisturbed by panic. The ring closed and then expanded from the center. Insects and small animals bolted from the scorched grass, fleeing toward the outside perimeter. The fire didn't spread wildly. A wildcat bolted out, watched from the bushes a moment, then dashed back to carry off its kittens. Thick smoke rose as if from a forest blaze. The ring of fire widened more than 10 meters, then burned everything inside it until it died down. Vede waved his wand and conjured a gust of wind to blow the black ash away, revealing the dark gray soil beneath. Lupin followed with a water charm, sprinkling the ground to keep dry leaves from flying. Only the little house hidden beneath the tree and the surrounding weeds remained untouched. From start to finish, the two of them had not approached the house. Vede looked up at the smoke rolling into the sky. "Let's begin," he said. "Even though everyone in Little Hangleton is asleep, someone watching from a distance will see this and call the police." A forest fire wasn't a small thing. As soon as anyone saw smoke, they'd likely alert the authorities. This place was far from the town's fire station, and the road was rough, so they still had time. Lupin nodded. "Remember what I told you. Precise control is more important than raw power." "Yes." Vede sheathed his wand and drew out the Rowan wand with a phoenix feather core he'd bought secondhand. He calmed his breathing and cleared his mind until he felt razor-sharp focus. Fiendfire, incendio! An orange-gold flame burst from the tip of the wand like a living thing and struck the great tree beside the gaunt house, immediately kindling into a furious inferno. Vede did not lower his wand. He stared at the blaze, feeling a vague, secret tether between himself and the fire. Lupin kept his wand raised, ready to act. Fiendfire was terrifying and notoriously hard to control, but it could be countered. If Vede slipped, Lupin could shore up a temporary barrier to buy him time to regain mastery. The flames licked and grew, then suddenly took shape, a hound that seemed about to devour something, then dissolved. A hippogriff burst from the fire, circled the house once, set every flammable place alight, then melted back into the flames. The creatures shifted constantly: dragons, phoenixes, nifflers, akamis, wolves, chimeras. Some flew, some ran. At times they seemed poised to break the ring, but Lupin's water curtain would hold them. Gradually, the fire beast's movements became nimbler, yet they no longer pushed past the boundary. Lupin glanced at Vede. Fine beads of sweat dotted his forehead. Lupin silently admired him. Many wizards never dared use Fiendfire. Fear of the spell made it harder to learn. Lupin himself had learned Fiendfire as a teenager. He and a few friends had done reckless things without reverence for the dark arts, and he'd had to burn many things on a beach before he could control it. He'd planned to teach Vede by letting him fail a few times and wear out an old wand, but he hadn't expected Vede to succeed so steadily on his first try. This young man looked like a natural-born wizard, destined for power, perhaps to rival Dumbledore, maybe even surpass him. Lupin narrowed his eyes as the flames coalesced into a golden bird, like a phoenix but not quite Dumbledore's. It spread its wings and rode the fire, its eyes appearing to be pure embers that watched them. From the inferno came intermittent pops, sometimes like glass shattering, sometimes like something exploding. Lupin was not surprised by such noises. A house that had once belonged to a wizarding family would likely be warded with spells, and Fiendfire ate through most of them. Then Lupin's calm broke. From within the flames, a familiar scream rang out. Chapter 179, The Second Horcrux Destroyed. The ear-splitting shriek, like steel on a skull, stunned Lupin for a heartbeat. Then a huge humanoid shadow, wreathed in flames, surged out of the wreckage. It twisted, howled, and locked its burning gaze on V and Lupin. You dare, it rasped, then lunged. Lupin snapped back to himself. He plunged his wand into the earth, and a vast, transparent barrier shot up around them. The fiery figure slammed into it. Fiend fire sprayed outward like splintered glass. Immediately, the firebird dove in, swooping straight at the shadow and tearing at it with talons and beak. Roars and shrieks answered each other. The shadow smashed through the firebird's assaults again and again, trying to reach the two of them, but Lupin's barrier held. At the worst moment, the thing nearly shattered the shield, but the firebird suddenly swelled several times its size and crashed down on the shadow from above, its sharp talons raking at the flaming shape. The fiendfire sprayed then, starved of fuel, began to gutter out. Gaunt's old house and the great tree beside it were almost reduced to ash. Then the shadow gave a desperate, soul-wrenching wail and abruptly dissolved. The firebird, having lost its adversary, dropped to the ground, looking around in bewilderment. Under Vade's steady control, it drew together the scattered fiendfire and sat on the ruins of Gaunt's house until the last blade of grass was burned and the last brick cracked. Lupin lowered his wand, pale, his fingertips trembling slightly. The last time the diadem burned in the cave, a similar shadow had appeared. Here, too, it had shrieked and shown something like thought before attacking those who destroyed it. That pattern couldn't be a coincidence. Terrible possibilities flickered through his mind as he recalled obscure passages from the books he'd read, searching for a kind of magic that could produce such an effect. The firebird shrank and shrank until it lay on the dust no larger than an egg. It looked up at Vide and opened its beak as if to let out a faint, silent cry. Vide approached, knelt, and never relaxed his hold on the fiendfire. A thin silver mist flowed from the tip of his wand and wrapped the bird. The mist did not burn away in the fiendfire. Instead, it seeped into the creature's form. Of course, pure thought has no shape and cannot be consumed by fire. As the mist thinned, thread by thread, the firebird's eyes brightened. It no longer tried to ignite Vide. It lowered itself and bowed its head. Vide whispered soft spells and magic sigils flashed across the bird's body. Deep circles of power multiplied, complex runes traced precise paths and embedded themselves into the bird's form. The dying fiendfire drew on ambient magical energy, and the bird's body gradually stabilized. Feather patterns began to form on its once ethereal skin. Lupin stood nearby, holding his breath, afraid to interrupt. It was his first time witnessing biological alchemy. Even as a wizard, he found the process profound and mysterious, almost enough to make him forget to breathe. He thought he heard a heartbeat, perhaps only illusion. After some unmeasured time, Vide lowered his wand. The firebird hopped twice, spread its wings, and leapt into the sky. It darted and soared, sometimes beating its wings wildly, sometimes folding them and diving, sometimes streaking back and forth with lightning speed, sometimes perching to preen. Each time it touched a dry branch, Lupin's chest tightened, expecting sparks, but only a few charred marks remained when it flew away. After a while, the bird returned and landed before Vide. It stretched its neck, gathered itself, and strained until it produced its first full cry. Chirp, chirp! A tiny ball of flame speckled onto a dead leaf nearby. The leaf flared instantly. Frightened, the firebird jumped back, then swallowed the little ember and hopped to Vide's palm. Careful, Lupin cried, lunging forward. But Vide was calm. The bird sat on his hand, controlling its fire so finely that only faint wisps of white steam rose from its feet. Lupin watched and noticed a thin film of water on Vide's palm. The boy was unharmed, but shook his head in disapproval. Too risky. It's all right, Vide said. I made it with the intent of guardianship and loyalty. It will never harm me. It is no longer indiscriminate fiendfire. It's a sentient being. Then keep a close eye on it. If this little one flies off uncontrolled, it could cause terrible damage. It will stay by my side, Vade promised after a moment's thought. How about Mihail? Sword of flame, light born from darkness. The bird cocked its head, and whether by coincidence or instinct, gave a small nod as if in agreement. Lupin smiled. He had seen Vide's magical familiars before. He'd even represented Vide at the Aslan Magic Workshop during their design and construction. He wasn't surprised at another enchanted companion. He didn't yet understand how different Mihail truly was. The difference wasn't simply in the form or the craftsmanship, but in the nature of its life. Conventional biological alchemy breathes thought into the inanimate. Even Vedi's more flexible, growth-capable magpets were essentially enchanted artifices, magical versions of artificial intelligence, not truly alive. Mihail was different. When Vede found that standard alchemy could not be applied to a fiendfire creature, he remembered fragments of what Professor Mori had once taught about true life alchemy. Though the professor had warned that creating life was forbidden, he had nevertheless given Vede occasional, guarded lessons. Now Vede stared into Mihail's golden eyes and wondered silently, "Are you truly alive, or only likeness of life?" True life alchemy should be long and arduous, not something achieved in minutes. Golden patterns of magic braided in Veda's irises as he watched the bird. Though every sigil on Mihail had been placed by Veda's hand, the complexity and depth of those patterns felt as if they had not been made by him at all, but instead were a miracle arising naturally from the world. The wail of a fire engine siren cut through the forest as it closed in. "It's time to go," Lupin said. "Wait a moment." Vede bent close to Mihail and whispered, "I'm counting on you." The firebird spread his wings, golden flames unfurled and rolled over the ruins. For a moment the blaze swallowed everything. When the heat died down, the bird plucked a charred ring from the dust. Some black, tar-like residue still clung to it, but after a few more spits of flame from Mihail, it crumbled to ash and fell away. The gold of the band had melted and resolidified into a strange, misshapen lump. Mihail pecked twice at the metal until only a dark stone remained. He returned it to Vede, gently placing the black gem in Vede's hand. Lupin leaned forward to look. It was more like a lump of coal than a jewel, marked with the familiar triangle around a circle and a vertical line, the sign of the Deathly Hallows, and the stone itself was cracked through the center. The curses and enchantments that had clung to it were gone, burned away by Mihail's fire. Vede wrapped the stone in a handkerchief and examined it in the light. He knew what it was, one of the legendary gifts Death had given the Peverell brothers, the Resurrection Stone. Turn it 3 times while holding it, and you could call the dead back, except those so-called resurrections were not true returns. Only the holder could see them. They could not truly live again. The stone offered nothing but hollow comfort, endless loneliness, and pain for anyone who used it. It was a supposed divine relic that turned out to be a curse, far inferior in effect to the Elder Wand or the Cloak of Invisibility. Vade's mind ran over the old story. Dumbledore had wanted desperately to see his dead sister and parents. He had put the ring on carelessly and fallen victim to Voldemort's curse. Even with Snape's potion to slow it, the curse could only buy him a year. Dumbledore was Dumbledore, and he used that last year to set a vast plan in motion, arrangements that still guided Harry after his death. But the year without him had been the darkest and most dangerous the wizarding world had seen. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had to leave Hogwarts and run. Muggles and wizards were killed. The Ministry became Voldemort's accomplice. Students throughout the school suffered under cruel rule, and only the Slytherins were largely spared. If Harry and Neville hadn't found and destroyed the Horcruxes, and if Harry hadn't turned the Elder Wand against Voldemort in the final struggle, Voldemort's darkness might have swallowed Britain, and then the world. It all began, in a way, with Dumbledore's possession of that stone. Had it not been cursed, a wizard of his power might have lived much longer. There were other ways to lengthen life. Nicholas Flamel and his elixir of life come to mind, but long-lived figures were rare. The witch who sold sweets on the Hogwarts Express had done it since 1830. Many assumed the post had changed hands over the years, but in truth it had not. Amando Dippet had reputedly lived for more than 300 years and had only recently died. His passing had merited barely a paragraph in the Daily Prophet. Apart from the founders, Dumbledore had been the most brilliant headmaster Hogwarts had ever seen. Even with white hair and a worn face, he might have lived on for a very long time, if fate had not contrived otherwise. V placed the stone into a charm-proof box and closed it. He transfigured the suitcase into a wardrobe, opened its door, and looked down at Mihail. "Mihail, can you stay in here?" Be careful not to burn anything." The bird nodded, flew into the wardrobe, circled once, found a dry patch, and chirped twice. Vede gathered a few stones and dry branches from the hillside and fashioned a small nest. Mihal spat a mouthful of fire into it. The branches ignited, and he settled himself contentedly in the blaze. Vede closed the wardrobe, tucked his pencil case away, and left the woods with Lupin. They reached Little Hangleton to find the fire engine passing through the village. The sirens aroused the sleepers. People sat up, dazed, staring at the plumes of smoke beyond the trees. "Fire!" someone shouted, and panic rippled down the street. No one thought it odd that they had just been asleep. No one noticed the two men hurrying along the lane. A knot of villagers stood outside the pub, watching the smoke. Lupin and Vede slipped around them and went back to the room they had booked. In the center of the room stood the black, vanishing cabinet. "You go back to school first," Lupin said, opening the cabinet door. "I'll take the cabinet back to Hogsmeade." Vede nodded wordlessly, stepped into the cabinet, and vanished. In an instant, he was back at Hogwarts. Zoe was waiting at the other end with a smile. Lupin closed the cabinet door, straightened the few signs of life left in the room, opened his suitcase, and carefully placed the vanishing cabinet artifact inside. He slung the suitcase over his shoulder, lowered the brim of his gray bowler hat, and walked out. Inside the pub, the bartender Mac and a bearded patron Pete stood talking about the forest fire. "Probably someone had a picnic and left a bonfire smoldering," Mac said, "or a wind-carried cigarette butt started it. Most fires begin that way." Pete snorted. "What about those two customers from before? I still can't believe a full-grown man turned into a child." "It's true," Mac insisted. "They both had black hair and gray eyes. It's got to be the same person." "Wouldn't father and son be more likely than reverse aging?" Pete countered. "I didn't see anyone else go in," Mac said. "You must have missed it," Pete said. Lupin slipped to the doorway and, unseen, raised his wand. He whispered one word, simple and precise: "Obliviate." A flash of pale light brushed the two men. Their faces unfocused for a beat as the spell did its work. A few moments later, Mac repeated his earlier thought as if it were fresh insight. "Yeah, could be a cigarette butt. Most fires are started that way." "No, I thought the fire was deeper in the woods. An unextinguished bonfire seems more likely." "No matter what, some people just don't think about fire safety in the woods. It's always our lot to suffer for their carelessness." As Mac finished, he had the odd sensation the door behind him had moved. He glanced over his shoulder, saw nothing, and turned away with a shrug.